Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we will analyze the technical details in V2 skating of Johannes Høsflot Klæbo, who, as most of you probably know, is the undisputed best cross-country skier. In the previous technique video, which was the first one in the series, you gotta know that the speed is a product of the cadence, like the number of repetitions per minute or per second and a second factor, the distance covered per stroke. As previously mentioned, that people are different and there exists no single correct answer when it comes to skiing technique. This doesn't mean there aren't aspects of other skiers' technique one can watch, analyze, and learn from. One can definitely come a long way by getting inspired by other people's technical solutions and then implement it in your own way of movement. Let's start analyzing Klæbo. By the way, in this video we will put the main focus on his technique at moderate speeds, typical distance race kind of technique. V2 is probably the most important technique to master if you want to be able to skate fast. The first thing I think about when I think of his skating is the deep angle of the knees. The angle of the lower part of his legs is quite extreme and characteristic. Straight versus bend legs is something that was discussed in the previous video as well, regarding double poling. In skating, it's the same discussion. There is a huge difference from individual to individual in terms of how straight the legs are. The person most notably known for straight legs is Sergei Ustiugov. Klæbo is on the totally different side of the spectrum. His knees used to be even more bent when he was younger, but this particular detail is still clearly visible. The advantages of more bent legs could be that it helps making it easier to find the balance on your skis. At the same time, sitting constantly in this position will be very hard on the musculature and perhaps obstruct blood flow. If you ask me personally, I am not a fan of too deep positions. As mentioned, technical solutions are individual, so maybe this is what works the best for Klæbo considering how his anthropometrics and biomechanics are, but I would not recommend trying to mimic or imitate him on this specific detail. In my opinion, the legs should, for the great majority of people, not be totally straight like Ustiugov and not as deep as Klæbo's either, but somewhere in between. If anything, due to the argument of moving in a way that is cost-efficient, I actually believe being a little bit closer to Ustiugminator will be better, especially in long distances. The second thing that is quite remarkable about Johannes is his very high frequency in V2 skating, especially in uphills at lower speeds. His cadence is obviously one of the highest of the top skiers, and it can look like this is cost-effective for him. This way of moving looks effortless because it doesn't require a lot of force. Even though he has more than enough of power, he doesn't use these power reserves as much at lower speeds. This is very interesting because it's very different from the more force-dependent technique of his Norwegian fellow Simen Hegstad Kruger, for example, who has a much lower cadence and covers a much larger distance per kick. Experimenting and testing it out yourself is probably the way to do it, to find the optimal solution for you. Trying to force an unnaturally high cadence is, however, not a good idea in my opinion. It should feel like it's efficient, and not be forced in an unnatural way, just because Klæbo has this high frequency. Technical detail number 3. Twisting of the hips. One thing Johannes always has done is this weird, untraditional twisting of the hip region and upper body, especially at lower velocity. To be honest with you, I can't really see why it should be beneficial. At times it looks like he does it on just one of the sides. It can be like, on the right side, he keeps his hips straight, and then he twists on the left side. Viewed from straightforward angle, this detail can make his movements look uneven and kind of unsymmetrical. If there is something I miss on this one, please explain in the comments section what this strange hip twisting could be good for, but I just don't get it. I would actually recommend staying away from this, and don't try to copy him on this specific detail. Try to keep the hip region and upper body more even and stable, without the twisting motions. This weird detail is, however, not as pronounced in higher speeds. Klæbo's skating at higher speeds is close to perfect, but at lower speeds he is not the best in my opinion, even though he is really good. Next. Arm and elbow position. Klæbo's arms when skiing are very characteristic. Viewed from straightforward angle, they're very wide, and viewed from the side you can see the arms being very tight and close to the body. He has talked about this himself and explained that he feels he is able to generate more power the closer they are to the body. His physiotherapist also quoted that his chest or pectoral muscles were extremely tight and limited when they started working together, So the reason why he has the arms so close to the body viewed from the side could not only be related to where he believes he generates the most power, but also because the chest tightness doesn't allow him to have the arms any further from the body. His opinions saying closer to the body equals more power are probably correct, but the speed isn't only dependent on the power, but also how far you're able to move your whole body every stroke, as explained in the video about Geerdalen. Many good skaters have the poles a further distance from the body than Klæbo has, which potentially could lead to a longer achieved distance per stroke and better blood flow, but it's a very interesting discussion and it's hard to say for sure who's right. What is also very interesting is that Bolshinov and Klæbo actually have this one thing in common. Their elbow and arm position is actually very similar. Their arms are extremely wide and extremely tight and compact. This idea that the guy who wins always has a perfect technique is of course not true, so I am not saying they're the best because of the arm position, but it can still be mentioned and pointed out. Is it a coincidence or not? Let me know what you think. Balance. When it comes to Klæbo's balance, it looks to be very well developed. There is not much to say about it really, other than that it's excellent. Balance matters because if you struggle finding the balance all the time, it will cost a lot of energy when trying to constantly adjust and finding the good spot where you stand comfortably on the ski in a relaxed way. He gets a 10 out of 10 when it comes to balance, and back to what we talked about earlier with bent legs, this might also be one of the advantages he gets out of skating with such deep angles. Despite the deep knee angle, he still manages to avoid falling too much backwards with the hips, which is very important. If you're sitting too much, it will be very hard on the lower body, and it will not be cost-efficient over long distances. When someone says, he stands tall, what they're often talking about is to have both the hips and the chest forward in a kind of majestic-looking posture. The direction of the kick. A few months ago, there was a shorts video on this channel where I expressed my opinions about kick direction in skating. Many coaches tend to say you should kick straight to the side, which is a totally wrong advice. The kick shouldn't be a straight backwards either, of course, but kicking slightly more backwards than to the side is the right way to do it. I use Northug as an example of how it should be done. These two extreme ways of kicking are called back pressure and side pressure, although somewhere in between might be the optimal way for most skiers. When it comes to Klæbo's kick, it's certainly not the most back pressure dominant, at least not like Northug, but it's not straight to the side either. There isn't anything special about the direction in which he kicks, but there is one thing he also does differently from Northug. Northug had much more extended or stretched out positions, while Johannes has much shorter kicks and is in general more compact than Northug. His arms are very locked and he doesn't extend the legs in any meaningful way, while Northug had much more focus on gaining terrain through a much larger range of motion. Klæbo has much shorter and limited range, but he has in return a much higher cadence, at least at lower to moderate speeds. When sprinting, he will of course increase the range of motion. I also believe Klæbo has been taking core training much more seriously than Northug did, so the instability in Northug's movements, especially in the center of his body, could not only be related to technique, but also a much weaker and less compact core. Northug didn't train much strength, at least not with any kind of consistency. As far as I understand, Klæbo has a daily routine of core training, and you could also see it in the way he moves. He is very stable and compact, except from the weird hip twisting thing mentioned earlier. But other than that, he seems very stable without certain obvious muscular weaknesses in the body. The hip twisting detail looks like something that's more related to a bad habit rather than a lack of core strength, but I'm not 100% sure of these things. These are just my assumptions. Klæbo's skis are gliding very much in the direction of travel, or straight forward, especially when the speed is high. Sometimes looked from an angle straight forward, it can look like one of the skis is gliding more diagonally, while the other ski is more in a line straight forward. Another thing one can't forget mentioning is the way he is being tucked forward while skating. He has actually a very pronounced forward lean of the upper body. Maybe he gets some extra watts into his poles through better utilization of the body weight while doing this. His head is not extremely crouched or in a so-called hook-like position, but the whole upper body is leaning forward to a rather extreme degree, especially when the speed goes up. He has also the pressure concentrated more forward in the shoe, rather than on the heels. Last but not least, rhythm and timing. One thing he is a master at is the rhythm. When he moves, regardless of the speed, There is almost never any interruptions in the movement patterns. It's very much like what some people call a wheel. The metaphor of a wheel means there is no stops but continuous movements in a way that is cost-efficient. He might not have the longest range of motion, but he has exceptional balance, rhythm, and general coordination. If the rhythm is too choppy, it probably means you're doing something wrong. It should look relatively smooth and even, without any remarkable stops in the motions. His timing, between when he kicks and when he starts to use the poles, etc., is also absolutely phenomenal. When he starts the kick, he has also a very smooth motion with the feet. This is a detail that matters. Certain skiers have a very significant stomping when skating, while the top guys like Klæbo are able to avoid this amateur-like high lifting and stomping of the feet because this will not be efficient at all. Starting the kick as close to the surface as possible, with a bit of feeling and smoothness when touching the snow is the way to do it, to not waste any energy. All in all, Johannes Høsflot Klæbo is a true artist on the skis, who you can learn a lot from. In this video, we have not only focused on the excellent aspects of his technique, but also about the few details he perhaps can do better. But there are, of course, a lot more regarding technique he is already doing perfect than pieces he can improve. If you enjoyed this type of video, let me know in the comment section down below. If there is enough positive response from this kind of technique videos, we can dig more into it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you and bye-bye.